World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945. The war was fought in Europe, Africa, and Asia between the Allies, which included the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, and the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. At this point in history, America is dealing with the lingering presence of the Great Depression. The president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, came up with a strategy to ease the issue of unemployment. He called it the New Deal. Unfortunately, this strategy did little to mend the problem of unemployment that faced society. No doubt Roosevelt faced many difficulties in light of World War II, but he acted to restore society's confidence by speaking directly to the public by a series of radio broadcasts called fireside chats. American isolationism came from an idea that American interests should be separate and non-entangled with those of Europe. Many members of Congress and the U.S. population felt that the U.S. had been wrongly led into World War I. As a result, each nation sought its own solution to international economic disaster. In 1933, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, later called the Nazi Party, won control of Germany. At this point, most Americans hoped the war would disappear by itself, but once the U.S. entered the war, patriotic unity became the key word in the war effort. Motion pictures, radio, and other visual images defined the war and ensured support. Music became a unifying force as well, causing a common musical idiom to bring together ethnic and geographical regions and increasing morale. The Holocaust was the murder of roughly 6 million European Jews and millions of others. The Nazi Party wanted territorial expansion and so-called racial purification. Gypsies, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals were seen as racially inferior according to the Nazis. Hitler, the Nazis' leader, believed that Jews were the root of all evil. In his opinion, Germany could only be saved from collapse by the total destruction of Jews and Jewish influence. Taking a look at the spiritual context. The Dutch Reformed Church held the strong belief that all human beings are equal before God. The Dutch Reformed Church's opinion on World War II was that military violence would not provide a solution, and that governments should commit themselves to investigating the causes of the strife and tension, and seek to eradicate them through international negotiations, arbitration, and the League of Nations. They believed that the church should use its preaching ministry to convey a clear message regarding the need to tear down the walls of misunderstanding, hate, and enmity, and take a stance for peace. The church was called to proclaim a gospel of peace, and therefore must struggle against war. It should support every movement towards peace, and should condemn both the glorification of war as well as the stoking of the flames of war. There were some members of the Dutch Reformed Church that expressed sympathy for National Socialism in Germany. Around this time, a right-wing paramilitary group grew in prominence. The Dutch Reformed Church, whose members were mostly against the war, thus increasingly had to deal with political divisions within its congregations. Protestant churches. Germany's 45 million Protestants were not united in one church. This 45 million was made up of Lutheran, Reformed, and United churches. In each German state, the members of these denominations joined together to form a regional Protestant church. A handful of Protestants openly opposed the Nazis, while others classified themselves as neutral. Still others actively supported Nazism. As Protestant churches responded to National Socialism, Some struggled to keep the independence of their churches from the grasp of politics and government. Some key changes came about with Protestant churches in Germany. Firstly, Nazi leadership supported the German Christian movement. Now, the German Christian movement was a group of Protestants who wanted to combine Christianity and National Socialism into a movement of its own. Secondly, Nazi leadership encouraged Protestants to unite all regional churches into a national church under Ludwig Müller, a well-known pastor and Nazi Party member. Many German Protestants allowed and embraced these changes. A national vote was taken in July of 1933, in which 2/3 of the voters supported the German Christians. Because of this support, Nazi racial ideology was brought into the church by the German Christian movement. One of the consequences of this was that if a leader in the church had parents or grandparents who had converted from Judaism to Christianity, according to the 1933 Civil Service Law, they were no longer permitted to serve in their position. By January of 1934, Müller promised to purge Protestant churches of all Jewish influence. This included removing the Old Testament from the Bible because of its basis on the Hebrew Bible. The Confessing Church was a different church in Germany. The Confessing Church's slogan was, "Church must remain church." They focused on protecting religion from politics and Nazi government. They believed that there should be no changes made to the Bible and that anyone baptized in the faith is a Christian, regardless of racial descent. The disagreement between the Protestant churches that had morphed into the German Christian movement and the Confessing Church was on how much influence the Nazi government should have over how they practiced their faith. 2 bishops and a member of the Confessing Church met with Hitler to say that they only wanted the right to disagree on religious matters. But Hitler did not compromise. The 2 bishops were made to sign an unconditional loyalty statement to Hitler, but the 3rd person did not sign. As a result, he was targeted by the Nazis and eventually imprisoned in concentration camps for 7 years. After the meeting, the Confessing Church decided to limit their opposition to defending church teachings against Nazi influence. A well-known member of the Confessing Church was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He became an important symbol of resistance to Nazi Germany and was eventually executed for his active resistance. The Netherlands in World War II. In 1940, the Germans invaded the Netherlands by bombing Rotterdam. Even though the Netherlands had declared that they were neutral, the Germans still came. The Dutch army was poorly armed and had fewer soldiers than the Nazis. After a 4-day battle from May 10th to the 14th, the Dutch were forced to surrender. The Netherlands were occupied for 5 years after that. Many consequences and restrictions were placed on the Dutch by the Germans. The Dutch had no freedom of press. Writers could not write about what they wanted, and no one could read what they wanted to read. Furthermore, the Dutch were running out of food. Rationing of food, clothing, and other goods began. The Dutch both actively and passively resisted the Nazis. The passive resistance included not listening to Germans, listening to illegal radio, and reading illegal newspapers, while the active resistance became life-threatening. Active resistors would print illegal newspapers, forge documents for Jews, and help Jews hide. This brings us to the main subject of our presentation, a woman who actively resisted the Nazis during their occupation.
Cornelia Corrie Ten Boom is from the Netherlands. She was born on April 15, 1892, to her parents Casper and her mother Cornelia, for which Corrie was named after. Corrie had 3 siblings. Their names were Betsy, Nalia, and William. When she was growing up, she lived in an apartment with her family, above her father's watch and jewelry shop in Haarlem. They were devout Christians and belonged to the Dutch Reformed Church. Corrie's faith was very important to her and her family. They respected the Jews living in the community because they believed them to be, quote, God's ancient people, end quote. After Corrie's mother died, Corrie decided to enter the profession of watchmaking, and in 1922, she was recognized and licensed as a watchmaker, which made her the first female watchmaker in Holland. But when the war broke out and the Nazis invaded their country, the family's lives would never be the same. They became a beacon for the Jews in their community. The watch shop on the lower level of their home became the perfect front for the Ten Boom family. The family ended up building a small closet-like room within Corrie's room. That was a perfect hiding spot that could hold up to 6 people standing up. It was used as a place to hide the Jews while the home was being searched by Nazis. It is said that the family saved up to 800 people from the Nazis. Some Jews would stay for a few hours, while others would stay for a few days until they moved on to the next place, seeking safety from the Nazi invaders. On February 28, 1944, was a horrible day for the Ten Boom family and the people seeking refuge in the Ten Boom home. February 28, 1944, was a horrible day for the Ten Boom family and the people seeking refuge in their home. An informant for the Nazis told of the Ten Booms and how they were helping the Jews trying to escape persecution. Including the Ten Boom family, 35 people were captured, while 6 were safe in the shelter that was in Corrie's room. Corrie and her sister were brought to the Ravensbrück concentration camp close to Berlin. While they were in the concentration camp, Betsy, Corrie's sister, died on December 16, 1944. Corrie was released 12 days later. The reason for Corrie's release are mostly unknown. I believe it was a work of God. God had bigger plans for her. Corrie returned to the Netherlands after her release. She became a spiritual force. She created a rehabilitation center for those who survived the concentration camps. With her spirit of love and forgiveness, she also welcomed those who had cooperated with the Nazis. After that, she started a ministry where she was able to go to about 60 countries. Here is an excerpt from Corrie's book, The Hiding Place. Quote, it was in a church in Munich. We're going to start that one over. Munich?
Munich.
Thank you. It was in a church in Munich that I saw him, a balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken. It was 1947, and I had come from Holland to defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. And that's when I saw him, working his way forward against the others. One moment, I saw the overcoat and the brown hat. The next, a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. It came back with a rush. This huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, how thin you were. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard in there. No, he did not remember me. But since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian. I know that God forgives me for the cruel things I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well. Fraulein. His hand came out. Will you forgive me? And I stood there, I whose sins had every day to be forgiven and could not. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, But to me, it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I ever had to do, for I had to do it. I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. And still, I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so, woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulders, raced down my arms, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. End quote. This is an extremely powerful testimony of God's forgiveness, and that He is the only one who supplies it. Corrie did amazing things. Towards the end of her life, she moved to California and died at the age of 91 on her birthday, April 15th, 1983. She had saved so many and loved so many. She loved and forgave. We can all learn something very special from Corrie Ten Boom.
The Ten Booms seem to follow a rather utilitarian teleological system of ethics. Utilitarianism holds the belief that, quote, the morality of an act is determined by its end result, end quote. We can see this system of ethics through their decision to hide Jews escaping for their lives within their home. The Ten Booms are looking at the end result. If they were to turn the Jews away, the Jews would likely lose their lives. On the other hand, their choice to help the Jews could end in the loss of their own lives, and that is certainly not an end result that many people desire. This brings us to the lesser of two evils ethics, in which one decides to act in accordance with whatever the lesser of the two evils is in debate. From the Ten Booms' standpoint, lying to the Nazis' secret police, more commonly known as the Gestapo, about harboring Jews in their home, and committing blatant crimes against the state were more evil than turning away Jews who were fearing for their lives. The Ten Booms set aside their selfishness to preserve their own lives and began to help the Jews. They acted with full knowledge that they would most likely end up imprisoned, sent to concentration camps, or dead. The Ten Booms' ethical beliefs and actions stem from the Bible, as they were Christians and, more specifically, members of the Dutch Reformed Church. Corrie's contribution to ethics is therefore heavily in biblical ethics. Although they lied, which is outlined as a sin in Exodus 20, verse 16, quote, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor," end quote. There is also evidence in Scripture of God using and seemingly approving of deception against his enemies. From James 2, verse 25, "And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way?" Rahab is justified because she lied to her own leaders concerning the spies. Does God then justify Corrie and her family for protecting the lives of the Jews? At any rate, the difference in the two stories is that Rahab came to faith and was promised protection for her and her family when the Israelites returned. The Ten Booms were made no such promises. This makes their actions all the more incredible. The fact that an entire family would decide to risk their lives for the sake of nearly 800 Jews is a phenomenal act of faith-based ethical wisdom.
In this next section, we are going to be focusing more heavily on the biblical aspects of whether what the Ten Boom family did was moral. From a young age, essentially every Christian child is taught that lying is a sin, but we are also called to take care of our neighbors and love our neighbors. Jesus' last sermon before being crucified can be found in Matthew 25:31 through 46. The passage starts by talking about sheep and goats and how they will be separated during the judgment. The sheep represent the righteous, and we're put on the right hand of God. And the goats represent the wicked, and we're put on the left hand of God. This is what verses 34 through 46 says. Quote, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they will also answer, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison? You did not minister to you?' Then he will answer them, saying, 'Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." End quote. This passage is telling believers to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. That would be the Jews during World War II. The Ten Boom family are certainly on the side with the sheep. They gave food to the hungry. They gave drink to the thirsty. They welcomed strangers into their home. They took care of the sick and needy. They took care of the least in their nation, the children that God created, that were being slaughtered like pigs. And in Acts 5:29 it says, we must obey God rather than man. End quote. God says to take care of our brethren. Rahab took care and lied for these spies in Joshua too. The Bible certainly does not paint her as a villain. She was righteous. She is an ancestor of Jesus, our Savior. So if we look at the Ten Boom family and what they were doing to protect those who could not protect themselves, we can see similarities between the sheep in Matthew 25 and Rahab in Joshua 2. The Nazis were the leaders at the time. They were not protecting and taking care of those who should have been taken care of. In Daniel 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down and worship the gold statue of King Nebuchadnezzar. They refused to follow the law that he, the king, had set in place, and God protected them for doing what they believed was right. In the same way, God protected Corrie Ten Boom and used her for a vessel of forgiveness and a message of the saving hope of Jesus Christ.